Okay, so I also would like to ask two more questions, one for Michael and one for Bob. So Michael, how do you think we can use AI for persona design? So how can we go beyond traditional social demographics information and leverage from AI for building persona designs? Like a lot of companies are investing a lot of money now trying to determine their persona so they can have a better focus on their customer experience design. So how can you use AI for personas?
That's right. Yeah, the you see customer journey mapping being a big term in the CX world now, and
Right.
you have all these people rushing to try and do it. And there's like, if you Google that term, you'll see all these different maps. There's like tons of different ways. People, I think, are just kind of
All the
figuring their way
post-its.
out, and they don't really
Right.
understand it. And so personas obviously play into the journey maps. I've never seen a persona in my time that's demographically driven, though. So maybe I just came in too late into the game, but all the personas I look at are based on behaviors. So this person is more likely to do this person enjoys doing this, and it's driven through something we call, in the CX world, we call jobs to be done. And so you look at the underlying jobs to be done of what someone's trying to, like their goals essentially, and then you're able to build the personas on that. So one example would be, like, if you're looking at a cinema chain and you want to take your kids there, and it's at noon on a Saturday, a competing business for those jobs to be done would also be a daycare center or somewhere where the kids can go play. It wouldn't just be another cinema. And so when people are looking at the competition, they're doing the strategic planning, and they're trying to understand their personas, they should look at it more from a jobs to be done perspective. Now, how do you get more information into how they're trying to achieve those goals? Well, Bob actually talked about something at the beginning before we started recording today. So YouGov just published something. I don't know if you guys saw it. And what they did was they asked people to rank different words between 0 and 10. So what does good mean? What does atrocious mean? And so what you can do is you can pull this kind of information in and quantify it, and then you can cluster it. And then as you cluster, that's how you build your psychographics as opposed to your demographics. And that's one way that I think is a very good way to go in and define your customer types. I think demographics, whilst they have their place, are not really at the forefront of CX anymore, at least from what I'm seeing.
Yeah. Great. You have a second question, Guy?
My second question is to Bob. So we know that customer perceptions and expectations change over time, especially along multiple touch points in the customer journey, right? And since these touch points are not standardized across competitors, do benchmark even mean anything at all in your opinion? Are they more harmful or helpful? Like when they're comparing different scores that they're gathering using either surveys or performance, but especially surveys. What's your opinion, Bob, on that?
Well, that's a good question. I tend not to compare companies across touch points. What I do is I try to compare companies across like an overall loyalty metric of sorts. It could be the recommend question, overall sat, because every customer has an opinion about satisfaction or how likely they are to buy something from a company. Okay. Another way to look at benchmarking is in a customer survey, to simply ask your customers what are the competitors they are currently using or have used, and then ask them to essentially rank you against the competitors from worst to best. And I found in my research that question, like how do you compare to the competitors, that's a better predictor of upselling and cross-selling than any other customer touch point. So there are other ways to get at comparing yourself to competitors rather than just looking at touch points. You can look at, like I said, relative performance, just overall metrics of loyalty or satisfaction, things like that.
What you just described is called the wallet allocation rule. Have you heard of that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing when sorry, Michael, go on.
I finished. I was just clarifying the name of the metric.
What I was going to add is I see a lot of companies benchmarking their different results. And when I mentioned the customer journey points or the touch points in the customer journey, it's because sometimes you have companies deploying one of these metrics right after sales. And no matter what you ask, the answer of a customer that is responding a survey, whatever, right after sales, it's very likely to be very different than a customer that it's in another stage of the journey that might be happening like 1 year later. So what I see is that oftentimes companies are comparing different results that shouldn't be compared. So they're not comparing bananas and bananas simply because even when they're using the same metric, you're deploying it not to a significant sample of the population, but they're using a significant sample of the population, but in different moments of the customer journey that can affect dramatically the results.
Well, that's where all the biases come in, right? So you've got the bias of trying to justify your purchase decision, among other things, that totally affect the answers that the customers are going to give, right?
Keith, that's a great point. That's exactly right. Because I think you're talking about a longitudinal study.
Yes.
So I did some research a few years ago that looked at satisfaction in the sales phase of the customer life cycle versus marketing versus service. And I found that the early stage satisfaction is a really good predictor of how satisfied you're going to be later on in the customer experience life cycle. And for that matter, if you have one competitor that measures, satisfaction, after a year of using the product versus another company who surveys customers that have used the product for a month, those are drastically different comparisons. You probably should avoid that.
Yeah.
Right. Ramsey, I read a little bit about those biases in your book, if I'm not mistaken, and about how those affect purchasing decisions and how you can kind of use behavioral design to avoid that. Is that right?
Yeah, that's the hope. So in digital behavioral design, we do cover this. There are identified, I think, about 60 different cognitive biases. So from the first person perspective, these are great to know because they are the emergent bugs in our code, so to speak, in Cortex that are not anything intentional or probably don't confer any particular evolutionary advantage. They crash out of the architecture of the mind and they kind of screw with us at times. But then as someone who develops customer experience solutions or someone who's responsible for understanding how and what customers do, they're critical because they're the checklist you almost have to go down when evaluating someone's behaviors to say, well, what if we can rule these out, then we might be getting closer towards understanding their actual motivations and being able to model them. Though to admit it, sometimes things like, why did the customer buy this particular item instead of the other? Well, we showed them several options, one of which was a slightly less high value version of the same thing. And that has been shown to automatically induce a preference for the high value thing, even if it's more expensive. Oh, okay, cool. That's a design pattern.
Right. So you have, like, for example, in supermarkets where you've got the shelf, so you've got the top shelf, and that tends to be the more elite products, et cetera, or you've got the products that are in the eye's view that lead people to choose those first. And product placement is a whole science on its own, right?
It is, and this comes out of some of the work done in nudge theory and choice architecture by Cass Sunstein, Richard Thaler, and John Balls on why it is that at the cognitive level, we often just go with the default. We just take the easy options, not because we're particularly lazy or feckless or poorly willed, but rather it's a way that our brain just conserves processing power. If you just go with the default, you get to focus on other important things. So everything ranging from whether or not people donate organs to how people choose what they buy at the supermarket to whether or not someone's going to register to vote, largely are just architectured by the people who get to make those types of design decisions. And my favorite part of that was that actually under President Obama, he opened in the branch of the executive a social sciences task force that was responsible for taking choice architecture and these techniques from behavioral engineering and use them to do things like get people to sign up for healthcare, get people to register to vote in their municipalities, encourage really pro-social behaviors regardless of your political position. So we know that these techniques work. We see them also used in England. England was famous for having the nudge unit of the British Parliament that was responsible for very much the same way, figuring out how do we use these things, not just in the consumer experience space, but then back in real life to change how people behave in ways that are good for our countries.
Yeah, promote positive behavior, right?
Yeah.
Michael, do you want to go ahead and ask one more question since you didn't get a chance to ask it, since we're already recording overtime here? We'll make this a special just for people who actually...
I'm trying to think who the best person is to ask the question to. I'll ask my question for Bob then. I don't know if you're familiar with the book Small Data, but I'm quite fascinated with the ethnography approach to gathering information. And I wonder, is there anything on the AI horizon that you see that could ever replace that or even be a tool to enhance that? Or do you think ethnographers are going to be here for quite a while?
Well, I think there's value in ethnography just because I think it could be a good idea generator for understanding what drives customer behavior. And that's why I would need to talk to Guy a little bit more about this, the Worthix methodology, because I think that's where he's headed. He's letting the customers speak and kind of understanding where they're coming from, rather than dictating, answer your question on product, service, marketing, support. I just want to hear what you have to say about this product, or about how you use it, where you use it, and so forth. So I think if you want to know, like, if AI is doing that, I think Worthix is a good start.
Okay.
Thank you.
Do you want to add something?
No, I think that's it. I think that when it comes to AI and customer experience, companies should be always trying to not using AI for the fanciness of it, but always trying to use it as a tool to solve a major problem or to answer a major question that it's important for the company, and always try not only to be driven by what kind of data you're gathering, but try to use the more correlation as you can to kind of validate your hypothesis without having your own cognitive biases deciding based on the things you're reading. So that's it.
Great. Well, folks, I think we're going to wrap for today. Once again, I appreciate this. I think I'll use this as a special to send to people who subscribed as a little extra bit in their mailboxes after post-webinar. So once again, thank you so much for coming on. And to our viewers, I want to encourage you to research and look in and reach out to our panelists today in case you want to know more and hear more about what they have to say and their points of view. Several of the panelists have material out, books written. Go ahead and research that as well. It'll definitely be on the details page of the webinar. And thank you so much.
You're welcome. And thank you, Mary, for organizing all this.
Thank you very much. That was great,
Thank you, guys. And thank you, Mary. It was a great job.
Awesome.
Awesome. A pleasure, gentlemen.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye, gentlemen.